Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, and welcome to Umlink Energy Speaks Back, powered by Hark. My name is Paul Webb. I'm the founder of B2B Energy, and I'm your host. And weekly, I present to you experts from around the world. Welcome to episode 91, and we are home in the UK, where I meet an energy expert who has diverse expertise in the energy sector. Our purpose, as always, is to provide a good understanding of energy management knowledge from around the world, which is available today for us to deliver savings that impact on our planet. On our journey of knowledge sharing, we would like to thank our sponsors, who are Hark Systems, renowned for their energy software, Clean Energy Revolution for their knowledge and networking through LinkedIn, B2B Energy for the 11-week energy program and managing organization's third largest expense, Alexis Energy for their power management, led by Vision, who are an LED and controls company, Watts for the electronics and EV transition, Carbon Black Global for their waste to energy initiatives, Cinefex for their insulating coatings, SmartCool for their AC initiatives, and Umlink, who are taking the confusion out of energy management. And lastly, our certificate partners, Esther Energy. Today's guest is a true energy expert who's focusing on energy management for various different types of organizations. So without any further ado, I give you John Swallow. Good afternoon, John, and how are you today?
I'm very well. What about yourself?
I'm very good. Nice and warm in the UK today, wasn't it?
Yeah, we're up here in God's country, just outside Leeds in Yorkshire, and it's still fairly glorious up here. So
beautiful
had to
day.
put the sunshade down on the window just to
I
make
can
sure
see. I always notice it when I'm interviewing someone. I can see the sun over in the background, but the sun's going right across. The sun's shining on you today, as it is.
On the righteous.
How did I know you was going to say that? So, John, you are one of the rare guests of mine where I've actually met you in person. And I had the privilege of, we met at the ENCO conference, and you've done a presentation, which was amazing, of what you've done with that organisation. We're going to touch on that shortly. So for the benefit of our audience today, can you give us your background and possibly touch on your origin story?
Yeah, okay. So I'm an electrical engineer by profession. I started in the 80s, went through college, but I was very quick to learn, as were my colleagues, that effectively hard work pulling cables in and doing arduous tasks wasn't my forte. So I'd always get the very small, intricate wiring pieces to do. I got given a computer at a very early age as well, and I messed around with that. And I got into configuring pieces and bits and pieces of things. So my origin is around that. I got into, through electrical engineering, I moved very swiftly into sort of like automation. And I would have worked in places like the Rover factory in Longbridge. And places like that, where we used to do all sorts of different types of integration. And again, I'd be the guy making the loom cables and then turning up on site and kind of commissioning the stuff. So obviously that led into a sort of service engineer orientation, and I worked primarily across a lot of Europe, going around fixing things. So I began to develop a fairly good sort of mentality towards solving problems. But I think a very famous scientist once said, "I'm not the most intelligent person. I'll just stay with the problem longer." And I think that's where I've been.
Can you remember who that was?
I should do, but I can't.
Good saying. It's a good saying.
Yeah. So, but I mean, it was kind of like one of the most pragmatic things. I think the key was for me I'd always be first on site because I wouldn't be able to sleep at night because I hadn't worked out what I needed to do the night before. I'd gone home in a bit of a tiz and then come back and thought, right, I really need to fix this. And quite literally that would be my sort of process. As I learned to kind of solve things, I'd always make recordings of it so that effectively if something like that happened again, I could quite literally go back into my notes and sort of prepare for making it very easy. So I had the 500 quid screwdriver, as it were, because I could turn up and just press a button and everything would go back to normal. So then I got involved through some sort of contracting programs that we got involved in energy, but more along the lines of control and automation. And I always thought that the best way of managing energy was to remove manual intervention and automate any kind of process. And that worked with my mentality as an engineer. So, programming PLCs, putting sensors in place and such like. And I very quickly sort of like got involved in a lot of sub-metering projects. So we worked with Schneider Electric as a sort of integrated partner with those guys. And we'd go around the country setting up metering and monitoring devices. But again, I was the one left with the computer and putting the gateways in and pointing the IP and setting FTP files up and all that sort of thing that kind of got the stuff off site. So that would have been around about sort of late 90s. I also did a qualification in line infrastructure. And as I was doing that, one of the projects within that was something called E-Ready Buildings. And E-Ready Buildings was pretty much the first dalliance towards smart buildings, which involved flood wiring of Cat5 cabling, and then obviously what they were suggesting at the time then that obviously internet or structured cabling would be ubiquitous across communication levels, into buildings, into processes, so on and so forth. And of course, that's where we've ended up. It might work wirelessly or whatever else, but there's somewhere a piece of copper, a bit of fibre, and a router stitching everything together. So I took a little bit of a pause around about sort of 2012. So I'd worked in the industry for a good 12 years, doing the metering and monitoring. Did some fairly big projects with the likes of Warburton's Bakery, where it rolled out probably in excess of about 3,000 or 4,000 meters across their estate. I left to go and work for a startup business in Milton Keynes. So they were a manufacturer of microwave lighting solutions, and I ran their international sales division, strangely. So again, I operated across the globe, doing that. So if I wasn't in Milton Keynes, I was in an airport lounge somewhere, very rarely at home. But then I got headhunted for a position within a construction business company called GMI, which is a Leeds-based business. They're pretty strong now. I think they've got like a 400 or 500 million sort of turnover now. And I was headhunted to set up their energy division or their consultancy services. So from 2013 onwards, I did that until 2016 when I set up my own business. But primarily what we'd done was alongside a renewables business and an M&E business, which was part of the energy reduction strategy. I ran the consultancy services, which was pretty much primarily back then looking at ROIs, doing all the calculations, putting all the low-cost carbon stuff together, and then potentially driving things through standards. ESOS came in as well. So, and that's when I got involved with the likes of BSI and ISO 50001, 14001, so on and so forth. So,
what was a trigger for you to go on your own and set your own business up? What triggered that?
The company was GMI Energy, as it was very much sort of funded via a solar business. So we had a renewables business that was kind of like the engine of it, and the feed-in tariff dropped away. And so there was a kind of a downturn in the project side of things there, and I just felt that we'd misnegotiated the opportunity in the first instance because we should have seen it coming. What we should have been doing is potentially then driving more of our operational level towards doing something different other than just being reliant on the engine of the business being a solar business. We did a little bit of biomass and things like that as well. So part was potentially not necessarily being completely 100% controlling my destiny, but the other part was obviously as well that I had a voice and I wasn't necessarily being heard as well as I thought I would have been. So I decided to do it for myself.
It's funny listening to your story. It's very similar to mine. So I'm an electrical engineer as well.
Okay.
I wasn't too keen on the hard pulling in big cables in, doing all that. I like the problem solving side. So I used to like, when I was at the nuclear power station, rather than having to be the one stripping down all the turbines and, the hard maintenance, I was the one that used to like doing all the fault finding and all the, what's the problem here and how can we get this piece of equipment working? I didn't like the new build side of it. And you do a lot of new build work in that role. And I find myself wanting to be, and then after I was doing that, I found myself transitioning into controls, building controls. So my background's, so I worked for the Met Police in the doing BMS systems. And then I went to Trend, Satchwell, and then you mentioned Schneider. They're all of my sort of portfolio of companies that I've worked for. And then when did you go? When did you go on your own? What year was that?
The back end of 2016.
Right. Okay.
So I've had a fair decent run at it, to be honest. But I mean, the original concept was around, realistically speaking, taking those consultancy services and then really trying to grow the capacity of what was going on in the energy industry then, even though we didn't see what was kind of coming and seeing the sort of debacle that it is now. But strategically, we were always aligned to trying to provide some form of standard methodology around how to do energy management. So we built, everything that I did before as an engineer had systems at the end of it. Energy management systems became kind of like a good transitional perspective.
Exactly. For me. Again, it is a good process, isn't it? From A to B. And then you mentioned ESOS. Are you an ESOS lead assessor?
Unfortunately, yes.
Yeah.
My
words exactly in the right audience.
Well, I mean,
very stressful, isn't it?
Well, it's not really served a purpose. I mean, if you, I suppose this is it depends how you look at it. As a generation of cash for a business, an energy business, it's everything and more. When it comes to getting something from it yourself as an individual, if you care about something, then it's lacking any meaningful reward. And I don't like the key with that is that, and this goes back to sort of like ethos to a certain extent, is I don't like doing something that effectively I know is going to end up in someone's bottom drawer. I want my reports to be read. I want my reports to be utilized. I want my reports to be questioned. And how can we make these better? And what does this mean?
What's the next stage?
Do we do that?
With ESOS, when it finishes, it's crazy, isn't it? And I know, when we've done the first phase, I was running around like a headless chicken, getting all this paperwork done and doing the notifications. And then so I insisted that we presented these reports to the board. Thank you very much. Great report. Oh yeah, we need to do all this stuff. but they didn't have to do all that stuff.
No.
And then I thought, well, something's going to happen from this. But then there I am, phase 2, doing exactly the same report, meeting with exactly the same people, getting the same answers. And now we're in phase 3. And I haven't done it. We haven't presented the reports yet, but we don't really know what's happening with phase 3. Then there will be some changes, and we're hoping that the energy consciousness side of it, I'm driving that through my ethos now.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting, again, going back to my principles as an engineer. If that people can't be bothered to do it, then let's make sure that they're redundant from making a choice. So, and the key was in the methodology of setting up a smart building. That's effectively, well, back in the 90s, early 2000s, that was exactly the mentality. We won't leave the lights on because they won't need switching off. A sensor will do it, but it's more than that. We found ISO 50001, and we've tried to use that as a almost like a stick to beat people with, to a certain extent, but at the same degree, potentially trying to develop the proper energy management system structure to allow people to not to have to worry about compliance. But people say cost, compliance, carbon in the sort of same sentence, and it's like for a lot of businesses, particularly back 2 or 3 years ago, compliance was just like it's a little bit of a nuisance, and so therefore I've just got to get it done. But the true meaning of ethos was, here is some things on a plate that if you do it, you're going to save a shed ton of cash. So that's what you should do. What's been missed from it is that traction, in terms of going back through those reports and asking the vital questions of the customers that you've delivered these types of reports to. What have you done? We can talk about a skill gap as well, potentially, because I've seen a lot of other companies' ethos reports, and there seems to be a lot of LED lighting in there, and then that's it, which is also annoying to a customer. So, we've met a few customers in the last, I would say, 12 months who have been mightily miffed about the opportunities that have been missed within an ethos report by an ethos auditor. But these are, manufacturers, process places. They might make foam or cushions, or, at grandiose scale, it may have chemicals used in the process to change a state from one thing to another. And they know what they need to do, but they have to do this compliance piece. And then they bring in an auditor who just goes, right, well, I've just seen 18 lights that are not LED, they need sorting out. And it's like, what about all the stuff on the factory? What about the smart things that we could do with that? What about tapping into the SCADA systems for how the whole factory's kind of running, and seeing what other clocks we can get from those types of machinery in order to say, any performance benefit that we might do, you can record that from the intervention that you've kind of written into the process. But that's where standardization comes, and that's where 50,001 for us is like the ubiquitous standard, and it's utopian to a certain extent. But we have found in the last, again, I'll go back probably 9-12 months, and we've got this nice cluster of companies that are coming to us and saying, right, we want to do this now. We're fed up of missing the opportunities, and we want to navigate away from something that looks like a menial task, and go for something bigger. And then the world explodes in terms of then looking at things like environmental, social, governance, things like 17 sustainable development goals. All of a sudden we've got this lean towards sustainability, environmental conditions, so on. And maybe in my maybe I've not been focusing correctly, but it all just seems to have kind of come together. I've just been in this energy furrow for 20 years, and I've thought that, if I reduce kilowatt hours, I reduce carbon. If I reduce carbon and kilowatt hours, I reduce cost. Those are the benefits. But any finance director needs to be shown the money as well. So it's when it's almost like when you stop and start the watch.
So tell me, you're talking about reducing the kilowatts and making savings on cost. What do you think is have you got a green driver in the back of your mind that sort of drives you every day regarding the climate change and making the planet a better place? Have you got that behind you, or is it just about the control and controlling things better for an organization?
No, I think it matters. I mean, I've got children. My children are adults now. We're potentially at the next phase for grandchildren, and we're kind of looking forward to that. But I think ethically it's all there. I mean, I drive an electric car, for instance. I have done for 2 years. Principle around trying to make it meaningful. Some of the maps that I've seen recently around the sort of sustainability stuff just tie up. So I've always made charitable donations. I've always tried to support charities. I've done a little bit of fundraising myself and things like that. So, we used to talk about corporate social responsibility. But yeah, I mean, the key is that if you can make savings, then you should make savings. If you can do something that's going to benefit the planet, then you should do it. I'm an outdoors nature type person. I spend most of my time at weekends out on a bike or swimming in a lake or something like that. So you see this, you see the kind of things that nature's given us. And you kind of think to yourself, well, we should be looking to protect these in whichever way we can. There might be some misalignment in where I am with it all, but I always try and do the right thing. And again, I will always be brutally honest with customers when they're not trying hard enough. Because it's the manufacturing spaces that I see that are like, what I do is, it's not inconsequential by any stretch of the imagination, but I do my bit. If everybody else kind of like contributed in the same manner, then collectively, all of a sudden, we've got bigger numbers in the board. So,
exactly.
But when I go out to site, it's a different minefield, and it's like, want you to improve. I know you can improve. You just got to develop the right culture, challenge yourselves, and learn from the process, and then give it back. But I think, ethically, there's something there. Like I say, couldn't paint a green picture, but I could certainly say I'm doing my bit, and I know why I'm doing it.
Yeah, and so we talked about ASOS. We've touched on the transition into ISO 50001. I want to really focus on, and you've been picking up on it there regarding the ENCO, the sort of being an ENCO practitioner. Where does that fit into? Because you put a case study together for a presentation, which was really interesting, and that was your client, wasn't it? That you was doing a dual presentation with.
Yeah. So client is Thorn Lighting. They are a lighting manufacturer.
Yeah, which is quite interesting, really, isn't it?
Yeah, I don't seem to be able to escape it, to be honest. So I knew those from years ago. So I'd done some work for Tridonic, who is the sister company that basically has a factory next door. They make drivers and LED chips themselves. So they do all the process around SMT and stuff like that. But many years ago, when we were doing our controls out on site, we'd often use a lot of Tridonic stuff. Again, going back to problem solving. Tridonic would then ring us up and go, we've got a B&Q store that's not working properly. Can you go and have a look at it? And I'd be the one who'd set off out and say, right, okay, there's your diagnostics, off you go. So we were working for those guys. But yeah, Thorn, the VP of operations was the ex-MD of Tridonic.
Right.
So and he'd held a global role as well with the parent company. So that's Zumtobel Group. So Zumtobel Group are probably one of the biggest lighting brands in the world, based out of Austria. But the Thorn factory is a brand. So Thorn is a brand of Zumtobel. They have a 450,000 square foot building up in Spennymoor, which is the northeast. And it was commissioned in 2008. An interesting story around the move was the MP for Sedgefield, which is just down the road from Spennymoor, was Tony Blair.
Right.
And Thorn were going to close because they were on some old, probably, it looked like a military camp. All these higgledy-piggledy buildings all over the place. Tridonic were in there as well. And in 2005 or something like that, they said, we can't exist in here anymore. We're just going to close. The MPs around the area got involved. They changed the jurisdiction of the land to be, when it was vacated, that they could build affordable housing on it. And they helped them move up the road on another piece of land and went into a purpose-built factory.
Right. So
Tony Blair allegedly saved Thorn lighting, but I'm sure they wouldn't agree. But let's not get into politics.
No. We're not allowed. My podcast, we're not allowed to get into politics.
No, sorry. So
we won't cut that because that was quite an interesting story, though.
Well, so but they went up there in 2008. I was actually involved in commissioning some of the Tridonic stuff, so I knew the factory quite well. Basically, in 2009, they won Factory of the Year award. Right. So it was cutting edge. So long story short, I'm in Frankfurt. I get a phone call from the VP of Ops. Are you around? And just so happened, well, we were at Light and Building. We were at a show called Light and Building. So Gavin must have known I was there. He rang me and had summoned me over to one of the halls. We had a quick chat, and he said, "When we get back, you need to come and see me." So that was the start of the process. They knew they had issues with energy. They knew they could do much better. And principally, we were going to go and help them. So I originally started the program with GMI, and obviously when I left in 2016, because I had some restrictive covenants, I couldn't quite move straight into it. Anyways, long story short, 6 weeks after leaving, GMI had realised that we'd got a fair amount of consultancy work on, and that I was a linchpin towards it. So rather than let people down, they squashed all my restrictive covenants and are allowed to crack on and help going out. Right. So that's when he said, how would you take it forwards? I told him what I needed, and he gave me what I asked for. So I started working on, so I used to spend a week, a month on site. And we quite literally started from scratch, looking at everything, doing the engineering, doing some audits, some surveys, so on and so forth. And the remit was, as long as I saved more than the consultancy time that I charged them for, then I just had my contract rolled over. So we did 12-month contracts. In the first year, we smashed the target in terms of getting the processes up and running. But interestingly enough, one single thing made the biggest difference. And we decided through the continuous improvement team to run a Kaizen. So a Kaizen is a manufacturing technique where effectively you take a group of people, show them a problem, and they help you solve it.
Yeah.
In essence, it involves.
When you say Kaizen, was that like a Six Sigma project? Was it?
Yeah.
Or was it Kaizen?
Yeah. So, well, it's part of Lean Six Sigma, but the Kaizen stands out as an activity within it.
Right.
So it's so effectively, the process went along the lines of we demonstrated to a team of people what energy was being used in the building. So we did what's called walk the wall. So we got loads of charts and information, put it all together, showed them certain things, and interestingly pointing out things like on a Sunday, why is consumption at this level, showing them all a baseline, converting it into something that would be realistic to them to understand. And then we do what's called a Gemba, and a Gemba is a good look around the factory, identifying things that didn't quite look right, had the opportunities for technology upgrades, say for instance, and then they brought all that back into the training room. We scrambled it all around, put some information together. We ended up with around about 300 interventions, I think it was. Around about 150 of those, maybe slightly more, were what were considered sort of things that they could just do themselves. So low capital costs, around about sort of anything less than sort of like £2,000 were something that they could do. And then we ended up with probably about 20 projects that were heavily investable in, which would make the biggest bang for the buck, as it were.
Right.
And that's where we started with it, really. But the thing that swung the pendulum for me was, and I hadn't actually realised that this was going to happen, that the people are the most important part of that process. And I've said this before, and I'll say it probably a million times. If you teach them what to look for, they'll do the job for you.
Yeah.
And the key is then, as an auditor, as an energy manager, as someone who is checking something, then realistically that's value tenfold. And it was like a paradigm shift in terms of what kind of traction we got from it. We presented it back to the board. Each of the teams basically represented their own projects, so they had some ownership over it. And it were really, really special, and I was lucky enough for that to be like almost my first ISO 50001 job. I think the key was that we'd done smaller projects before, but this one was like a massive effort, and we put heart and soul into it as well. So the idea was that, again, making people do the right thing, taking that stretch mentality, and then trying to get it across the wider groups. Thorn employed somewhere in the region of about 350 people in that factory. And at one time, I probably would have known at least half of them.
Oh, that's amazing.
So if I went round the factory floor, people would wave and so on. It's like every time I went up there.
Is it like because you had that big arrow on your head saying I'm the energy guy? But it's the same sort of thing, isn't it? It's the same approach.
I mean, after the Kaizen, Gavin, the VP, was a huge supporter of the movement. I really saw the benefit of what happened. The guys in continuous improvement were fantastic, and they'd be sending me emails. We've seen this, we've seen that, we've seen the other. What do we do about this? Or can you do as a quick calculation on that? Yeah. But we also used to then kind of hover around in start shift meetings, end of shift meetings, and just trying to soak into the culture of the factory, of the people, of the processes. I heavily bought into the continuous improvement stuff. I thought it was fantastic.
And what sort of savings was you seeing overall?
So second year, we managed 21% across the whole of fuel users. So that was when we were tracking towards, so we built the system 2016, 2017. 2018 we went for ISO 50001. So, but yeah, we were smashing it out of the park. And the thing was that engagement were coming from everywhere. Interestingly enough, Mark, who came and co-hosted the presentation with me, he's the quality manager, so he runs all the Lean Six Sigma stuff. But it was when we put the team together, there was a definite barrier. So some of the people that were in the room, you could obviously see that they were like body language in terms of, I'm an office waller and you work on the factory floor type thing. Yeah. And we quite literally destroyed most of those boundaries. But interestingly enough, again, some of the people who had been in the office hadn't been out on the shop floor for quite literally years. Right. And I just could not fathom that at all. It just did not compute in any way, shape, or form. It was an incredible kind of feeling. I just could not get it straight in my head as to why people weren't going out there on a regular basis. But then again, I suppose if you sat behind a desk and your job is to do non-commodity buying, for instance, then you've got to crack on, haven't you? Yeah. So, but then I said to the VP, we should have regular people coming to look at what's going on in the factory, show people what you've done, the changes, the improvements, tell them why, because it's their company, they work there.
Yeah.
So it's interesting.
John, how many people do you think was involved in total regarding, would you say is a high percentage of the staff? You mentioned 350 people. How many people really sort of was it impacted regarding energy? Did you manage to get to every single one of them through some form of communication, or would you say a high percentage?
It's a high percentage. Some of the people who worked in sub-assembly, for instance, possibly weren't kind of involved in the process, but definitely the team leaders. So there are around about sort of 25 team leaders, and again, through the end of shift, start of shift meetings, I got to meet all of those guys. One of the things that we sort of said to them was, whatever it is, whenever you want to say it, come and say it.
Yeah.
If I'm out on the shop floor, if I'm sat down having a sandwich, if I'm in my office having a coffee, knock on the door, come in and tell me what you need. But equally also as well, the guy who runs the factory and the continuous improvement team was always the one who said, don't be afraid of people who come on to the shop floor, and specifically when we had the audit through BSI for 50001, we openly promoted that they went and spoke to the auditor.
Yeah.
Not as any type of diffusion.
No.
Not in terms of potentially having a 10-minute conversation with them so that they could move something out of the way. It was like, because they wanted to tell them where they'd been involved in it, what they'd understood about it, and why it were important to them.
Yeah.
Even down to users of so there's two halves of the plant. So they bring in raw materials and they make it into the fixtures themselves. They paint it, then they do a sub-assembly. So you've got machine operators, lathe operators, that type of thing, paint operators, operatives that kind of do all sorts of stuff with bits of metal and move it all around. But if they had a significant energy user, for instance, they'd have a chart on the machine, which was part of a standard operating procedure. So the visualization was the energy bars that you would get on a refrigerator, and then something similar around if you leave this machine on for any more than half an hour, you've just used the energy for your house for the next 3 weeks.
Yeah.
So they knew about it as well. And the key was that they wouldn't just ask me about energy for there, they'd ask me about energy for home as well.
No, that's brilliant. So, yeah.
That's what I like about it. Yeah. But, other than changing everything for LED and putting controls in, automate your house. But that was phenomenal, the way it drove through, and it changed my mind on why we would want to take manual intervention away from people and then expect them to get involved in a process like this, which is.
So tell me, is there a case study that's been written around this?
Yeah. So if you go on the BSI website,
right,
and search ISO 50001, there is one case study on there for the 2018 standard. So two standards, 2011, 2018. The Zumtobel case study is the only one that's on there.
Right.
We wrote it and gave it back to.
Can we not find that on your website?
It's on our website as well.
That's what I was asking, John.
Well,
come and tell us about your website.
In fact, I've just had a message from the lady who does our marketing, and she's probably heard me say that because she's always telling me off for pointing it back at the BSI website. So
take that as your wrist being smacked. So what's your website? Something
separate, but she's always saying yes. It's on our website. So if you go on our website and look at case studies, click on Thorn Lighting, it all populates.
And what is your website for the benefit of the
audience? It's test-consulting.co.uk.
Brilliant. I urge everyone to go and look at that website. I've seen the case study for real on the presentation, which was very enlightening. And what you're saying there is, I can underline everything you're saying there, John. It's amazing what you've been saying. So, John, it's come to that time now where I'd like to put you on the spot. You're the guy that likes to be put on the spot. I know that. So is there anything you can give back today to our audience regarding a takeaway?
My takeaway is, this is almost like reflective. So, we talked about brutal honesty. I'm a holder of a mirror for most of my customers. And giving that reflection back to them and the principle behind it is where you can make the difference. So I think, if you can look in the mirror and be honest with you that you're doing everything that you possibly can do to save energy, then get your car keys and go to work. If you're not, spend some time doing some research around what you could be doing. Look for help if you need it. But don't stop short at anything other than excellence. And I think that's where you need to be. The industry, for me, to a certain extent, sometimes can be slightly dishonest. And a lot of things that are happening in the industry around things like ethos and the lack of traction towards companies trying to pick it up. Again, that's kind of like where I'm at. Let's do it, but take a good look at yourselves first before you start to flesh out where you need to be.
And if you're not looking at yourself in the mirror as an organization, find someone who looks at himself every day in that mirror to find that integrity.
That's the key. We all need help from time to time, don't we?
Yeah.
We might be very good at certain things, but woefully bad at others. And I think, in any business, you can't do everything. So, it's the right thing to ask for help. Finding the right consultant that has that ethos and drive and determination to make sure that you don't just give us an answer that's suitable for the time because you want to go home. It's important that we get it right. So it's going back to the principle of where I started as an engineer, staying with the problem longer. Not let it go. I'm not like some sort of crocodile with a vice-like grip, but at the same degree, I take some shaking off. So we'll be persistent as long as you care about what it is that we're doing. But it has to mean something to them first.
Yeah. John, it's great catching up with you. It's really interesting, your story. I knew we was in parallel with what we do in the real world. So it was great catching up with you, and I'd like to say, please, you and your family stay safe in these times.
And you, sir, thank you very much for your time. We'll have to catch up for a beer.
Sounds very good. I look forward to that.
You got it.